Okay, here we go. In case you haven't heard her, she's the new Abby Misha Petrov. So let's get into it. Somehow I doubt it, but okay. Triggered yet? I would think so. Okay. How? How? Examples, Misha. All I'm hearing is rhetoric. And some of them should have had a trigger warning. Seriously. For that. Oops. No. Well, yeah. Okay, let me pause this here. Misha, I think you're like misunderstanding the use of trigger warnings and fairy tales. And by the way, considering a lot of you banned the fairy stuff that um would have needed trigger warnings back then, you sort of agree with the notion, whether you realize it or not. Just because you don't agree with the trigger warning per se, if you agree with the stuff that's in there being censored, then you're essentially going down the same mindset. So what we're talking about here, Misha, is fun. So you're saying it would have made it less entertainment, cut up less entertaining, cut up the storyline. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But that's not the same as what you're professing to say. So let's see if you have any evidence. Well, what topic? You have to demonstrate something, Misha. This is one thing I notice about you and other conservatives is you love to go on about fact. I think you actually like berated a leftist TikToker for doing this just recently, and you're like, oh, they're saying facts, but just saying it's a fact doesn't make it one. You really have to demonstrate it. And you're not demonstrating a damn thing. You're just going on with um, rhetorical rhetoric. You're saying it's a fact, but you're never coming back and actually demonstrating it, and then you're moving on. So let's see if you have anything else to add. Of course, really. But just because I have to learn about it, and I hope you'd agree with this. I think you'd agree with this, considering it's right who says like, trans kids shouldn't, no, kids shouldn't be taught about sex. There are certain images and things you're not going to physically show a child just to say, well, we're teaching them. you have textbooks, you have alliteration, you have words, you have vocabulary to do this. So, nothing of that type gets trigger warnings usually in a classroom because it's like it's already beforehand, it's cleared out, it's reviewed, it's approved for the age appropriate class it's going into. So what you still haven't demonstrated anything, so let's see. I agree. Again, no, you don't. You don't have to see every single thing. The news doesn't back in my generation, it wasn't just like the like they visually put up the actual actions happening inside the world. Now, news was just as biased then to some degree, but it was biased with literal images, the type you shouldn't be showing to children. And I think this is all something we uniformly agree with. But here's the other thing. You still haven't demonstrated anything, and you definitely haven't, demonstrated its needs. And trigger warnings in classrooms usually aren't done that way. There's sort of like trigger warning. This is going to, let's say, violent scenery of rate of slavery, which includes whipping slaves. And you're warned that way before the images go up. So if it is triggering, um, you don't have to be there. You can still learn the contextualized material from what's written down in the book without actually having to see the act. And I think this is what you're talking about is not what's going on, but really. But here's the thing. Are you doing it to elicit an emotional response? Are you doing it to actually trigger an 8-year-old into having nightmares for the rest of their life because they saw it? Or are you trying to constructively teach them about it so they learn, so they know to avoid it? There's a big difference. What what you're like saying doesn't jive. There's a whole big difference between telling a child and littering to a child, don't put your hand in the stove, it will burn, than actually showing them images or actually demonstrating to them, here, give me your hand. I'm going to show you. We all agree that the latter is not necessary. You only need the initial. If they do happen to do the latter, then so be it. Like, but it's not something we go out our way to make happen. And that seems to be what you're campaigning for here. So what are you saying? No, see, this is what I'm getting at. You're saying that, but what you're describing is, oh, we shouldn't just teach the Holocaust. We should make it so they actually live it. And cause you're saying, oh yeah, they can get a certain amount from looking. You're not saying, like, anything factual. And what the arguments you're making have so many holes in them, they're not even funny. And I've watched a few of your videos, Misha, and I'm going to go through a lot of them, but this seems to be the case with most of them. Like, you do not want to actually, make a discussion what you do is, this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to cry about it, and so you should do what I say. And no, you're saying, like, at first you're saying trigger warnings ruin academics. You're not giving any facts, not giving any proof. Then you go ahead and say, well, they stopped them from discussing certain things. Don't give any proof. But then you move away from that and you say, oh no, well, it's like they can only show so much. Then you move away from that. And now you're saying, like, well, watching or reading a document, how do you read a documentary? You only watch documentaries. Like, you read history, you watch documentaries. How hard is that basic concept to get? And then you're saying, oh no, but they really have to get, like, they have to get a first-hand experience? Really? Is that where we're at in this conversation? Because if that's the case, I can tell you, you're dead wrong. Yeah, because again, certain people do get triggered by that. And it's a responsibility of the person demonstrating that or showing it to prepare them for that so they can make the decision whether they want to stay and participate in that part of it or whether they want to talk to the professor to have themselves properly excused. And if they do, they have to work out how that works with their professor, whether it be grading or materials or anything else. But they're well aware of it. And in the case of children, you also enter, like, as we've seen with all these discussions, parents, teachers, student trauma, what they've gone through. And you never, here's the other thing that's often not discussed: domestic violence. The amount of kids traumatized in the school system that keep on going to school that we don't find out are traumatized or abused till years later is astronomical. So you're taking consideration for this potential population in there to excuse themselves when it's reasonable. And you're saying, no, I don't want that. It's not your choice, and it's not your life. Those children have a right to be protected. The Bible seriously should have a trigger warning. They're forcing people as young as 3 or 4 to read and understand that. And that shit has a lot of, they've gone after, like, trans people, all this, like, sex education. Half, like, all that shit in the Bible, it's pornographic. It describes some of the most violent acts, the like most deplorable atrocities are, like, they are performed by God against humanity as a whole. And you're asking children to read that. You're asking children to read that. Children who haven't developed their own sense of self-worth, their own confidence, who don't understand or grasp the slightest bit of what they're reading or what it's trying to indoctrinate them into. And you're telling me that shouldn't have a trigger warning. Like, this seems to be more of what the right does professionally, which is me. I want, you must do for me, or I will throw a tantrum. And these videos are basically tantrums. What do you want? No, no, I don't have to accept it. See, here's the thing. If you told me, like, if I went to a class, a mixed class, and I said I'm triggered by learning about women or black people or Latinx, that you have an argument for because then you're like, you can tell me, like, what are you even doing here? But when you talk about the Bible, which is a particular thought system, which is geared to teach a particular amount of lessons, um, and I don't think there's a trigger warning for the Constitution. Although I do think there's some academic debate on the whole thing of all this men stuff, but yeah, it's nowhere near what they're saying. But leave it to the right to like passionately argue for bullshit. I mean, you're popular at it. But here's the thing, so are you. If you can't handle with someone taking self care and taking care of themselves in any setting, then what's your problem? Because it's not with them and it's not with the trigger warning. I got one hint for you. Look in the mirror. Like, seriously, we can go on this conversation, but here's the thing. Like, a kindergarten classroom is not the wild, wild west of Algeria. It's not the middle of nowhere China, high upon a mountain. You're talking about a constructive space. And when it's a constructive space, we do something called constructive instruction. That's what education is. We don't go willy nilly in there and just make up the rules as we go along. That's for people who just want to hear themselves speak and just want to, like, be me, me, me. And sorry, like, seriously, we already know they put TikToks on trigger warnings on TikTok. They put it on YouTube, Facebook, tweets, and it's absolutely ridiculous because half the time the trigger warnings don't like convey what they need to convey with enough time and enough care. We have to be yeah, okay, but at the same time in a classroom where you're supposed to be responsible for your materials and each individual student is supposed to be responsible for their mental well-being, a trigger warning for something like extreme violence or extreme traumatic events is expected. That's not like, go, you're not a. No, because most of those people would avoid those types of situations in the real world and then run away if they thought they were walking into one. That's just a fact. So, no, what you're saying makes no sense. Honestly speaking, we need to talk about serious issues, period. Not just college students. But you seem to be wrapped up, like, in your freshman year or whatever it is. And this is a whole mindset. And you're learning about this from your peers in your particular college who experience life this way, where this traumatic event may not be that big a deal. And so you're not concerned with it. But that doesn't mean they don't have to take responsibility for other students who it would be a big deal for. That's another thing in the real world. You have to actually coexist with other people. The first point of view. You can't just have the whole world and say it's all mine and everyone should be an automaton that acts exactly how I want. And that is what you are doing in this video. No, first of all, therapy doesn't fix it all. People go to therapy for years and years and still don't get completely fixed. Trauma is something you deal with your whole life, not just a moment of impact, not just for a short duration where you go through. And even that's not applicable to all people, but it is applicable to most. And that's a fact. And speaking of real world, like, all these videos I've seen you do are not of the real world, they're just of your opinion. And you always quote as fact, which it never is. Yeah, that's the other thing. You gloss over that, not everyone can. Like, there's such a thing as economics and poverty, even in this country, that is staggering, that keeps people from going to proper therapy and proper medical care. So, yeah, and no, it's not their responsibility to accommodate you, which is what you're talking about. If you want the extra triggering material, my advice is you do like most responsible college students and go research it on your own. The resources are abundantly available online. Google it. Anything, the Holocaust, you can find all the images, all the video, and go at it. It's not. That's not the point. His responsibility is only to teach the material, not to demonstrate it. If you are uneducated enough that you can't understand what Holocaust means, what gassing someone to death means, what the analogy of walking skeletons means, you are not educated enough to even enter college, let alone participate in it. And that's the point. And seriously, a lot of what you're going is going that direction that you shouldn't even be in college at this point. That's not what happens, and we both know that, and we both covered it. So to make these like obnoxious statements like triggered every time, people don't get triggered when they see the color red. It's usually a particular shade of it, a very particular shade of it, or it's the actual blood or the appearance of blood, and it's for very real reasons. And no, you just can't tell them to deal with it, because a lot of those responses are very severe. But you're not. You're talking about it. You talk about it in class. You talk about everything. What you're upset about is you don't get this like, oh, we can't say like what? Like the N word? Is that what you're gonna say? Say it. I'm friends with enough creators to know they tell you the same thing. Say it. But don't be like shocked when there's consequences to it. When you have friends that walk away. When you have like a physical altercation or an argument because of it. Because these are very real consequences. The problem is the right is a bunch of overgrown children who don't want to take responsibility for their actions. They want to say, I want to look like a big person and I want to carry a gun down the street. But then when they show off that gun for so long and someone comes at them with a gunfight, then they're like, why did that happen? Well, there's an old expression, live by the sword, die by the sword. If you go this route, there are consequences, real world consequences to it. And you just seem like nonchalant about it. I should live carefree regardless of what I do. And that's not a reality. No one's treating you as a child. When they say there is certain language which can be triggering and which may result in bad circumstances, they are trying to protect you from your irresponsibility as much as they are the other person. Because, see, like I just said, if you say the M word in the wrong place, there may be a physical altercation. If you're not ready for that, if you are not mature enough to understand that, you should not be saying it. No big deal. And if you do, as an adult, you should be prepared for those consequences and willing to accept them. It's a fact of life. Yeah, again, it doesn't help. It helps them when they say trigger warning. I'm potentially going to show photos of sexual assault. It helps people who actually went through trauma consider whether they want to sit there or not. Again, you are taking the place of someone who you don't know and don't understand, whose life you haven't led. Because even if you did experience something, if you didn't experience their particular life, you cannot know what it did to them or how they'll react. And your willingness to override that is exactly the problem, and it's exactly the egotistical, narcissistic response I expect from the right. Well, I don't know about Reed, but yeah, you could say that too. It's responsible. Again, you are taking another adult's experiences and feelings about the matter into consideration. That's very much a real world responsibility. And if you're not ready to participate with other people, then maybe no college. No, they don't. No, they don't. Because people who are ready to face it will face it, even with those trigger warnings. What you're doing is putting a straw man up here, and you say facts. You say there was a study, and it was like, and you don't say what the study exactly says. You just give, well, there's a study, which could be fact or fiction, and you don't really do anything else. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. And you are just going on here, and you're just repeating talking points. There are no facts here. Again, more right leaning, visceral talking points that have no basis of fact. They're just like people saying, I'm upset with. It seems like the people on the right are the ones more triggered because they just go on. I'm getting tired of this, but No, that's not how it works, and we keep going on. It's not an essential part of someone's identity if they're traumatized, but it is an essential part of their experience. And whether they go forward from that or they keep being triggered is very much a part of the individual. And studies have shown it is not impacted by trigger warnings or the lack thereof. What is impacted is a person's ability to walk away when they know it's going to be triggering from them, which is a responsible thing to do. Again, like there's so much PTSD and CPTSD out there, even undiagnosed, it isn't even funny. So you obviously don't know what you're talking about, and you're treating trauma like it's some like common cold. It's not. It has very real consequences that can be very damning. Um, Seriously, I don't know where you get these talking points from, but they're horrible. No, trauma is not about making you feel uncomfortable. Trauma is about making you feel unsafe and uneasy in your own skin. There is a huge difference, and this is why I say you're talking on a topic which you have basically no understanding of. Exposure therapy. Exposure therapy can be awful, and it has to be done under very controlled circumstances. There have been a lot of, and they know this because there have been a lot of cases, a good amount of cases before they started like doing it properly, where people were exposed to like things and it just went awful. It went beyond wrong. No, it's not. I mean, I'm not even gonna go on with all the transphobia and homophobia in this country because I can go on for months and years. But even something as because a phobia, see, when you're talking phobia, you're talking a rational fear. I'm afraid of the spider biting me. A phobia is an irrational fear. Like you think if you see one spider, they're gonna lay like 6 million eggs and take over your house, and then you're gonna be eaten alive one night. So you go out and get a bunch of M16s to like shoot up all the trees and that in the neighborhood to eliminate all the houses for the spiders. And actually, that's a pretty good that could make a pretty good analogy for how homophobia and transphobia work because it's the same thing. It's irrational. It's not a rational fear. It's not that you thought about it in some sensible way. And you say you're college educated? How? No, they're not. They are implementing these trigger warnings simply because they have had experiences, and there have been experiences across the board where children and college age students have been triggered, and it has resulted in very horrible and sometimes dire circumstances. So, in order to ensure themselves that they don't create or recreate the same circumstances, they have started using trigger warnings. It's no different than like if you just cross the street on a yellow and you get hit by a car one day, then you're like, oh, I could cross on the yellow, but let me look both ways first. Same difference. You're not making an argument. Again, where's teaching them the facts, whether in words or pictures or any other way, like a utopian view? If 6 million people get killed, it doesn't matter whether it's pictures or words or video that describes it. That's still 6 million people killed. And it's not a preferred circumstance. And it's not utopian. So again, you're not making your point and you're not making your argument. So you're pitifully trying to strawman this thing left and right. And even those strawmans are so weak. Thank God. All right, so let's get to it. First thing, lots of straw manning. Obviously, setting things up in false dichotomies, so she could argue against that and appear to win. But at no point did her statements ever get backed by evidence. There was never any proof given, and just all around wrong. Listen, I get the idea. Like young Republicans want to get up there, and these are talking points they're given, and sure, but even in basic college terms, you so failed. And I'm just gonna say this right here because I want to be absolutely frank, or Abby. I hope you haven't taken psychology yet because you absolutely failed every elementary definition of psychology in every way possible. You equated trauma to just being scared or frightened. You equated phobia with just rational fear. Nothing you said made any sense in an educated, well-informed venue. There's no way you connected any dots here. And, I mean, you're young. You're going for your degree. I think that's great. But at the same time, I would actually sit down and learn some of the material they're teaching. A lot of people these days seem to skip through it and they're just like, I think a lot of people, especially people in your shoes, need to sit down and listen and learn a lot more. All right, then.